Hello, BookTube. It is Tuesday morning. We got snow on the way. Well, actually, looking out the window, we have snow falling right now. I was planning on doing this video, which is the saga of the people of the Laxdaela Saga, part of Sagalong 2020. Some of my fellow hosts for this Sagalong have already posted. As some of you may know, we had a guest. We actually had two guests this past weekend. We had Frida Bean, a legendary booktuber, and her companion, Steve Donoghue. And they were, as always, a great joy. They liven up the house. I have 3 little children, so the house can be pretty chaotic at times. And they all love Frida, and Steve's a big hit too, let's put it that way. So, yeah, great. We brought him back to both of them back to Boston yesterday. So before we had the weather change, otherwise I would have loved to have him stay longer. The thing about that is, much like Vikings, and the reason we didn't get a video done, is we go to plunder, in our case, books, and then we also drink vast kegs, literally kegs, of spirituous liquids. So video making becomes a bit problematic. But anyhow, we had a great time. They are no longer here. The house is very quiet. And I thought I'd get into the saga. So this is the saga of the descendants of Kettle Flatnose. Gotta love that name. The peopling of Iceland by various families, you could almost say clans, descended from Un. And then this is the second part. Now, the second part is very interesting. So I'm going to give you a little bit out of the book here where we talk about this. So we're going to focus a little bit on Gudrun Osvrid's daughter. She had 4 marriages, and she loved a fella named Kjartan. It's Kjartan. I hope I'm close on that, but I have no idea on the pronunciation. So we start with Gudrun's fate being foretold in a dream, okay, which is very common in these sagas. And then we're seeing social change, right? We're seeing the march from a pre-Christian Viking or Norse community, a diaspora of opportunity, but also a diaspora caused by political unrest at home in Norway. So you have the unification of Norway under a powerful king. And you'll see these throughout this saga, these voyages back to Iceland. A lot of times these families have left because they felt it was in their best interest, and it probably was, to settle elsewhere. And Iceland's one of those places they settled. And so they would leave because of the new kings, but often they came back. It was part of the coming of age and a sign of prestige for them to have interacted with the king of Norway, and a lot of times they walk away with gifts and treasure and connections. We also see different parts of the northern world, such as Ireland in one case, and because one of our characters is descended through his mother, who was a slave from the King of Ireland. And so you have a whole northern world with commerce back and forth. So Gudrun will be married 4 times, and she wreaks vengeance in the old way, brings up her sons to wreak vengeance. I read it in this. This is what I keep looking to for my notes. Through her 4 marriages, she brings up her sons to continue this, to seek vengeance for their father. So she has an instrumental role in an awful lot of violence and death And to me, the interesting thing is she is an enforcing power. She enforces things. She very much a patriarchy, right? And yet it seems that she's the one who insists that the forms be followed. And she brooks no interference. She's a very strong character. So when it's time for vengeance, or if it's time for a man to go out and do what society expects, she's there enforcing the rule. And this has disastrous consequences. Leads to an untold amount of tragedy. Unnecessary from our perspective, and yet, social norms are social norms, and then they can entrap any of us. But and they change. This is sort of the lesson for me here. This is a society, a pre-industrial society, I guess you could say, very sophisticated in a literary and artistic sense. You can see some of that here. Politically, they had a thing called the All Thing, where they all met. It's an early form of democracy, and maybe the oldest in the world, continuous anyway. It wouldn't be the oldest in the world, but the oldest continuous, because it still exists. If I understand that right, you might want to look that up and see if I'm making it up as I go along. So the interesting thing is we have this transformation to an entirely different ethos, from the pre-Christian to the Christian. Now the king of Norway is forcibly converting. And you get some of this in Iceland sort of seeping through. 1 minute, well, you have to do this on your own, have a conversion, or no, you will convert. It's very cleaned up sometimes, but you can see in the text where it just the reality is harsher maybe than they want to present. So Gudrun ends up in a monastery. I don't even know if they say which one it is. They don't. She becomes very famous, sort of a saint. But I get the impression that's looking back. I don't doubt she ended up in a monastery, or I just think that the generations looking back revere her as a saint, but she's already been through the ringer and put plenty of people with her through the ringer. So my perspective is that Christian veneer was incredibly thin, and it became a place of refuge for her at the end of her life. So I would still not have messed with her. So she was a very tough, harsh lady. Intelligent and able to read situations on the ground, probably better than anybody else in this part of the saga, at least from my perspective reading it. So as a document of culture change on a massive scale, as thin as that veneer was, it was still a massive scale. I think this is a really, really interesting read. Some of my fellow hosts had different reactions to the second part of the saga. I really enjoyed the first part and thought it was very interesting, but I have to say I really, really, really liked the second part the best. And it's not the love triangle, because there seems to be very, very little love as we understand it. Here, it's the demands of the norm. It's how you can get caught up in a social fabric and it can destroy you. And this vengeance and vendetta is just hard to read about. So, but you see the things like the fostering of children to make alliances. You see half-brothers who are incredibly loyal to each other. You see some of the old ideas of ghosts and, curses. But you see it from the perspective, in my opinion, of almost a realist. A conversation about, these are high members of their society, but they're not nobles and earls. They're not kings and queens or courtiers. They're farmers. Another thing is they're always in boats, but either they're inept when they're in it, or they do amazing voyages and nobody says much. But you don't really get a great nautical flair. You know, they in this saga, it's about farmers in a valley that seem to be able to walk down from taking care of their livestock into a Viking ship and just go where they need to go. So that is harder to do than perhaps comes through in this. So their skill level must have been incredible, and that would require practice and lots of it. So I never could figure out as if these young men, when they would leave on the ship that was gifted them or they were gifted part ownership, if they just went as cargo themselves. It doesn't seem so, because we have arguments in one scene of how they were going to get to Ireland and where they were. But you would think professional sailors that were constantly sailing would be the most skillful, and there are those in the Viking world. So that's an odd little thing that I also noticed. But absolutely wonderful saga. Now my plan going forward was to do Njal Saga. I have that right here. Let me grab it. I'll get off camera, which I know is against the rules, but we can live with it. So this is Njal Saga, right? It's a penguin. It's a sizable thing. As a piece of literature, probably the most famous of the Icelandic sagas, and the one that reaches the level of literature in many people's mind the most, or of high literature, whatever that means. But it is going to be too much for me. I have an incredibly busy schedule, which many of my co-hosts also have, and I just am not going to be able to undertake it and succeed right now. I'm doing research on some papers for my library. I'm doing administrative things and all that stuff, which I love. And I love this obviously too. But I'm going to have to probably go with a couple of shorter sagas. I could get them out of here or right over. How do you do this? I'm not very good. Right there, that white book right above my finger is the Oxford World Classics of Eric the Red and some other sagas. So I'll look in there and in here, and I may do 2 shorter sagas to finish out the month. I love Sagalong. This is my second year doing it, and I do not want to fail. Maybe I will do Njal Saga next year for the start, so I can put it aside, and if it doesn't call out to me from the shelf until then, do that then. So I will probably be going. I will consult with my fellow hosts about what they are doing for sure, if they're doing shorter sagas, so that I try my best not to do something that they're doing, so we have a mix around Sagalong of different sagas. So there's plenty of short ones. So with that, again, we had a wonderful time with Steve and Frida. Hope to have them up here again soon. They're always a great joy. The saga has been a great joy. I thank all my co-hosts, and for the ones who've already posted, I apologize for being late. Enjoyed your posts very much. And for those of them who have been incredibly overwhelmed with life and work, like we all do, I'm looking forward to theirs too. So thank you, BookTube, and we hope to see you soon.